Hello, everyone, and I'm delighted to be standing here this time with David Smith, who, for those of you who don't know him that well, is an absolutely fanatic Spurs supporter. So I was going to say maybe the first question we should ask is about Spurs, and how are Spurs going to do this year, David?
Well, as a typical Spurs fan, we're very nervous about getting in the top four. Let's move on to...
Okay, moving on swiftly. One of the reasons that we're delighted to have David here is that he and I are actually both going to be talking about a return on investment project very shortly. So, which was driven predominantly, David, by clients, I think, end clients, brand owners, buyers of research who had a question about how we should determine this. How did it all come about?
Well, we all know that customer insight is important to organisations, but we still get this question: what should the level of investment be? Is there a way of measuring return on investment on insight? The question's been around for many years, but Esomar thought we'd have a look at this to see whether we could add some value to that and some clarity and some best practice guidelines.
And indeed, I mean, clients or becoming closer to clients has been a key element of Niels' strategy for this council over the last 2 years. Your expectations, I guess, what do you think this will help to engender, to promote amongst the client-side community once we've shared with them the results? And by the way, we can give a sneak preview, but not too much of the results, I guess, at this stage.
Okay, well, a sneak preview is there's a lot of interest in positioning insight around the idea of future-proofing organisations and helping them cope with change and getting some measures and metrics and case studies around that to show that to stakeholders. And I think that's come out of our work so far, and we're going to continue to work on that.
Fantastic. Now, so you and I, and indeed Pradeep from Unilever, are going to be on stage in the next half hour or so that it'll be a reasonably short interview this time. What do you think are the messages that, as somebody on the client side like Pradeep, what are the messages that he ought to be giving to those client side members of the audience?
Well, I think the idea of not looking for a kind of silver bullet solution. Every organisation is going to be different, whether there's a lot of local autonomy on the ground in terms of insight, or whether it's more centrally controlled, whether it's a private or public company, the culture and history of the company. So that you're going to need a bespoke solution. But there are some general themes there about, demonstrating how insight is future-proofing the organisation, making attempts to try and get all the data together to get that 360-degree picture of insight, and coming up with a kind of an eclectic mix of different ways of communicating that message to procurement and finance and senior stakeholders. So I like to feel we got a lot out of the study we've done so far, and it's sort of more work to be done in the future to make that concrete with different things we can actually share with members.
And I think that's one of the important points, is it not? That this is actually phase one. We need to continue to build on it and make sure that we can provide real practical guidance in the years to come.
Exactly. So far, we've spoken to insight leaders from around the globe in different sectors. We've done a detailed review of all the literature, what other people have said about ROI, and we've got some key themes that we're going to share in the next half an hour or so with the audience. But yeah, the next step is, I think, to cascade that out, get feedback from everybody, and then think about concrete, practical things we can actually put in front of clients and agencies and stakeholders, demonstrating exactly the power of taking a customer-centric approach in building an organization.
So, to be a little provocative, will there be kind of real concrete takeaways? Will there be things that client-side members of the audience can go back to their offices at the end of the week and say, here's something that we really need to do?
I'd like to think so. We've got 6 themes we're going to talk about, and we're inviting the audience to see where they stand on each of these 6 themes. Would you score yourself as 10 out of 10 on that? Fine, job done. But on the other themes and areas, maybe you're only level 4, work to be done. So that in itself provides a focus. And following that, as we progress the project, we can get down to some concrete things such as best practice case studies that you can share and say, this is a good way of getting the message over to stakeholders. Why not follow these general principles and adapt it to your organization?
Now, clearly, I suspect that the definitions or the expectations of return on investment will differ quite significantly between regions and sectors, etc. If there isn't a magic bullet, is there certainly one thing that everybody should bear in mind when they're looking at either establishing or developing their own insights team?
Yeah, I think that the general message is there are some sort of industry benchmarks that provide a kind of a general guideline to what you should be doing. You don't have to follow those actually literally, but it's sensible with that the information being out there to use that. On certain occasions, there could be particular tactical studies where there's quite tight, precise metrics you might use. But I think our bigger message is that it's really about powerful storytelling, demonstrating the value, making that explicit. You might not always be able to measure that, but is it the power of actually demonstrating how you've designed a business solution using customer insight and demonstrating that value? So there'd be some quite concrete messages and outputs coming from the study.
Fantastic. I think the other point, by the way, for those of you watching, that is also important to bear in mind is that the survey or the project, the report, the presentation we're going to make is not based solely on just the interviews we did, but also on a relatively detailed literature review. So we are going to hopefully encompass, provide an umbrella overview of everything that's been published. So I've tried desperately to get a few secrets out of him for the moment. Clearly David's holding all of his powder dry for the presentation, which will be on in about half an hour. So David, thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to invite Nada back, and don't miss the session. It's in half an hour on the blue stage.